Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be upcycling a pair of pants and a sweatshirt. We'll be adding unique patchwork to both the sweatshirt and the pants. And this is a super easy upcycle project, so if you are new to sewing, you should have no problem following the easy step-by-step tutorial. With all that being said, let's get started. Getting started with supplies, if you're going to be upcycling both jeans and a sweater, you'll need at least 2 yards of fabric. And there's a lot of different fabrics you can use, but I recommend sticking to a lighter weight fabric, something along the lines of a lightweight cotton or a flannel. You can even switch it up and use t-shirt fabric if you want to add a graphic, because what we're going to be doing is using a batting to thicken up the layers so it blends better with the garments. This is optional, you don't need to add it, but it does make for a quality finish. And to keep it simple for the video, I'll be using a standard flannel for the entire project. But anyways, moving on to the first step, we're going to be cutting out all of the shapes that we're going to be putting on both the jeans and the sweater. And you can cut these out in any size or shape. So if you want to do a bunch of small ones, you can do that. Or if you want to do a few big ones, you can do that too. Keep in mind, for each shape, you're going to need to cut 2 out of your fabric and then also 1 out of your batting. So that's why I recommend getting at least 2 yards if you're going to be cutting your shapes out of a fabric. If you're not going to be covering the entire garment, then you don't need as much fabric. And to prepare the shapes for sewing, what we're going to do is separate the fabric material layers and sandwich the batting in between the 2 layers with wrong sides together. If you're using a fabric that has a right side, you want the right sides to be on the outside. And from here, all we're going to do is serge around the outside edge. If you don't have a serger, you can use a zigzag stitch. This will clean up the outside edge and mend those layers together so it's one panel. Then you're going to want to repeat this for all the shapes you cut out, so this can be a very timely process. The next step is optional. Since we're using that batting in between the layers, we're going to be adding a quilting effect. This will give a little dynamic to each panel and make it look more detailed in the end product. And to do this, all you need to do is stitch straight lines across the panel multiple times. The spacing of the stitch is really up to you and your preference. I space my stitches out on the wider side just because I have so many panels to get through and it can take a very long time. But if you have the time, I definitely recommend doing it because it's a very nice detail to add if you're using the batting. But other than that, the shapes are all done and ready to be sewn onto the garment. And you can also do different style of quilting stitches. It's totally up to you and what machines you have to work with. Next, we're going to prepare the sweater, so for the moment we can place the shapes off to the side. When it comes to picking out the sweater, realistically you can use any sweater or hoodie. And if you're wondering, I'm just using a standard crew neck in an XL size. Depending on where you're adding the shapes, you may not need to do this next step to prepare the crew neck. I'm going to be adding my shapes on both the body panels and the arm panels. If you're just adding your shapes on the body panel, you can skip this next step. But since we're adding the shapes on the arm panels as well, it's very hard to reach that point with the sewing machine. So what we're going to be doing is dethreading the arms so we have an access point to sew the panels easily. And it's actually really easy to do. All you have to do is flip the wrong sides out and dethread about 2 inches away from the ribbing on the cuff and dethread about 2 inches away from where the arm meets the side seam. And I do recommend using a dethreader. If you use scissors, you're going to cut fabric and it's going to reduce the size of the arm. Typically it's just one serge stitch, so it's very easy to dethread. And that's pretty much all you have to do to access that arm to sew the shapes on. The opening should be large enough to maneuver around your sewing machine. If you want to make it larger, you can totally do that. What we're going to do next is keep the sweater inside out and start placing the shapes on the sweater. And you can place these in any order you would like. You can also place them directly over the side seam so it looks like the panel is going from the back to the front. And the same goes for the shoulder seam. You can place them directly over that seam. So you really have endless possibilities when it comes to the placement. For the sleeves, I'm going to be using smaller shapes just because there's not a lot of surface area to work with. Once you have all your patches into position, you're going to want to pin them down so the layers don't shift around as you're sewing. And from here, we're going to stitch on the inside of the serge so that serge doesn't show through once we cut the fabric. And again, this is a very time-consuming process if you added a lot of patches to your sweater. When it comes to the stitch, you can either use a straight stitch or a zigzag stitch. And after finishing up, double check each patch, make sure all the layers got stitched together, and then we're going to flip the right sides out. This is another step that you have a lot of opportunity to customize it to your style. We're going to be cutting just the sweatshirt fabric on the inside of the shape to reveal the patch. You can either cut a 1/4 inch away from the stitch to reveal the entire patch, or you can leave small strips so that way it looks like the patch is ripping through the sweatshirt. There's endless ways of doing this, so I recommend trying different things for each patch to see what you like the best. because you can always go back and remove more fabric if you don't like the look of it ripping through. If you did leave strips, we're going to be taking care of those in future steps, but before we do that, we're going to be adding embroidery to each of the patches. This is optional. I just decided to throw this in there because it's a fun thing you can do. If you don't have access to an embroidery machine, you can also screen print. This is also why we didn't seal off the sleeves yet, because we still wanted access so we could get to those patches. Now that we have the embroidery work done, we're going to clean up the strands we left in the previous step. And pretty much all we're going to do is position the strands in whatever way you want. For example, I kind of curved mine around the logo. Then we're going to pin each strand down and add a straight stitch or a zigzag stitch. And you're going to want to stitch across the entire surface area of the strand. This will lock each one down and prevent them from moving around and catching on things. But if you like the look of the loose strands, you can totally skip the stitch. Also at this point, if you don't like the look of them, you can de-thread and cut off the strand. But anyways, moving on, we're going to flip the wrong sides out and seal off the sleeves. And all we're going to be doing is lining up the fabric with the right sides together and add a serge directly in the spot of the original serge. If you don't have a serger, no worries. All you have to do is add a zigzag stitch directly on that edge. And just like that, your new Patchwork Upcycle sweater is complete. I also went ahead and added extra branding using leather strips and double-sided rivets. But like I said, there's a ton of different ways you can do this project. You can use different shapes, different sizes, different placement, using old sweater logos or t-shirt logos, switching up the fabric and adding a bunch of different styles of fabric in the one sweater. So it's super fun to play around with and make something very unique. Now we're going to move on to the jeans so we can place the sweater off to the side. When it comes to the pants, you can pretty much use any style of pants. You can use sweatpants, khakis, jeans. The sewing process will be the same with all styles. And the first thing we're going to do is start dethreading the side seams. We're going to start by dethreading the hem at the bottom just where the side seam is. And we're going to dethread the hem about 2 inches out on both sides of the side seam. This will open up just enough space so we can start dethreading the side seam, and then we can re-sew the hem in later steps. And repeat this step for the opposite pant leg. From here we can use a dethreader and go right up the side seam. Most pants have a chain stitch and then also a serge, so you're going to have to do this in 2 passes. And it's fairly easy to do. If you want to use scissors, you can, but you're going to reduce the amount of fabric on that seam. And the goal is to keep as much fabric intact as possible. Then go ahead and repeat this process for the opposite pant leg. You'll have a lot of threads hanging around, so you'll want to remove all those threads before moving on to the next step. And once you have both side seams dethreaded and cleaned up, the pants are ready, so we can grab the shapes we made in the previous steps and start laying them out on the pants. When it comes to the pants, I actually like to figure out the placement of the shapes on the right side of the fabric first. This gives me a better idea of how it's going to look in the end. And just like with the sweater, you can place them in any fashion and use any shape or size. Now that we have an idea of the placement, we're going to open up the pant legs and start placing the shapes on the wrong side of the fabric. And remember, whatever you want to show on the outside of the pants, you want to place that directly on the wrong side of the jeans. You can also place the shapes directly over the inseam so it looks like the patches crossing through the panels. If you are using jeans, you're going to want to watch out for the back pockets. This is pretty easy to avoid because you can see the stitching on the inside. The same goes for the front pockets. You're going to want to watch out for the actual pocket itself so you don't actually sew it into the patch. But other than that, you can place the patches wherever you'd like on the pants. Once you have all the patches in place, pin each one down, and we're going to stitch on the inside of the serge. The pants are a little bit easier to stitch because you open up that pant leg and you have a flat surface to work with. And again, you can either use a straight stitch or a zigzag stitch. And after finishing up, double check each patch, make sure all the layers got stitched together. If everything is looking good, we're going to start to cut out the pant material just above each patch. The same goes as the sweater. You can either cut a 1/4 inch away from the stitch all the way around the outside edge, or you can leave strands to make it look like the patch is ripping through the jeans. I'm going to be doing a little bit of both just to show you how each style looks with the pants. Just like with the sweater, before we sew the strands, we're going to first add embroidery work to each one of the patches. This is optional. It's a nice detail to add. Again, if you don't have an embroidery machine, you can also screen print. If you are trying to ramp up production, you can embroider each of the patches before you sew them on. Now we're going to move back to the strands and finish them off by adding a straight stitch across the entire thing or a zigzag stitch. I do recommend pinning them down before sewing so they don't move around. And after stitching, if you don't like the way it looks, you can always de-thread it and trim off the strand. Also, the fresh cut jean material doesn't look that great, but we're going to be fluffing it up in later steps. But anyways, moving on, we're going to flip the wrong sides out, line up the side seams, place a few pins, and you want these perfectly lined up because we're going to be adding a stitch directly on the old factory stitch. And you should be able to see where that original stitch was, so just follow that path. When you have both sides stitched, we're going to take it to the serger and clean up the edge. If you don't have a serger, a zigzag stitch works just as good. We're mainly trying to prevent fraying on the inside and bring it back to the original factory look. Now we can flip the right sides back out and move to the hem. Since we only dethreaded a little bit of the hem, we're going to roll the fabric inward so it lines up with the rest of the hem. Place a few pins and repeat this step for the opposite pant leg. Once you're ready, take it to the sewing machine and add a stitch. And I recommend using a thread that matches the original factory color thread. This will help blend everything and make it look like no alterations were done. Next, I want to show you an easy way to fluff up the edges if you're using a denim material. And all you need to do is run it through a couple wash and dry cycles. This is how it looks after one wash and dry cycle, so the more you do this, the more it's going to fluff up. And don't worry, it's only going to fray up to the stitch, and from there it will stop fraying. So over time, the more you wash it, the more tattered and authentic it's going to look. Just like with the sweater, I added a few leather strips added with double-sided rivets. So if you have any extra branding you need to add, you can do that at this step, because the pants are complete and they're ready to try on. And the fun thing about this project is you can use any style of pants, so have some fun with it, get creative, and make a pair of pants and sweater that really matches your style. And there you have it, your new patched pants or sweatshirt is complete. Hopefully yours turned out as good as mine. If you did add the embroidery, it does take a long time to go over each spot, and it does make it a lot easier when you de-thread the seams. It just gives you a little bit more space to move the embroidery hoop around, or if you don't have access to embroidery, you can always screen print. Like always, I want to see what you come up with, so tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing, and until then, I'm going to keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.